The mare stumbled on the riverbank, and Eleanor Hartley felt her heart lurch as cold water splashed over her boots, soaking through her riding skirt and petticoats all the way to her skin. She had been traveling for 3 weeks from St. Louis to reach her uncle's ranch in Montana Territory. And now, just miles from her destination, the swollen creek had nearly swept her and her hired horse into oblivion. The spring runoff of 1878 was fiercer than anyone had predicted, and Eleanor had foolishly attempted the crossing alone after her guide had taken ill 2 days prior in the last town. She urged the exhausted animal up the muddy slope, her hands trembling on the reins as water streamed from her dress and pooled in her boots. The landscape before her stretched wild and endless, rolling hills covered in new grass that swayed in the late afternoon breeze. Her uncle's directions had been specific, but everything looked different when you were cold, wet, and exhausted. Eleanor scanned the horizon, searching for the landmark he had described in his letter, a distinctive rock formation that looked like a woman's profile. There to the west she spotted it, and beyond that, the dark outline of buildings that had to be a ranch. She nudged the mare forward, though the poor beast was as tired as she was. Each step squelched with water, and Eleanor could feel her teeth beginning to chatter. The sun was lowering toward the mountains, and she knew that wet clothing and a cold Montana night could be a dangerous combination. She had to reach shelter soon. The buildings grew larger as she approached, and Eleanor could see that this was a substantial operation. A 2-story ranch house stood proud against the sky, its wood weathered but solid. Several outbuildings dotted the property: a large barn, a bunkhouse, what looked like a smokehouse, and various corrals where horses moved restlessly. Smoke curled from the ranch house chimney, a welcoming sign that made Eleanor's chest tighten with relief. As she guided the mare through the open gate, a man emerged from the barn. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see he was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his work shirt. He wore a hat pulled low against the sun, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this rugged landscape. He stopped when he saw her, his hand going to his hip in a gesture that might have been caution or simply habit. Eleanor urged her horse closer, acutely aware of how she must look. Her dark hair, which she had pinned up carefully that morning, now hung in wet ropes around her face. Her traveling dress, a practical gray wool that had seemed so sensible in St. Louis, clung to her body in a most improper manner. Water still dripped from her hem, creating a small puddle beneath her horse. The man pushed his hat back, and Eleanor got her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with strong features weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they studied her with an expression that hovered between concern and amusement. "Looks like you had some trouble with the creek," he said, his voice carrying a warm drawl that spoke of time spent further south before coming to Montana. "The water was higher than I anticipated," Eleanor replied, trying to maintain some dignity despite her bedraggled state. "I am looking for the Hartley Ranch. My uncle, Thomas Hartley, is expecting me." The man's expression shifted, surprise crossing his features. "Thomas Hartley is your uncle. He never mentioned expecting anyone." Eleanor felt a flutter of concern. Her uncle's last letter had been dated 2 months ago. Anything could have happened in that time. "I am Eleanor Hartley from St. Louis. Uncle Thomas invited me to come stay with him after my father passed away last autumn." Something in the man's face softened at that. He stepped closer, reaching up to take hold of her horse's bridle. "I am sorry for your loss, Miss Hartley, but I am afraid I have to give you some difficult news. Thomas Hartley died 6 weeks ago." Hart gave out while he was mending fence line. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She swayed in the saddle, and the man's hand immediately moved to steady her leg, a gesture that would have been scandalous in St. Louis but felt necessary and kind in this moment. "Dead," she whispered. "But he was only 53. His letters never mentioned any illness." He didn't know himself, I reckon, the man said gently. It happened quick. He didn't suffer, if that is any comfort. I am Cole Brennan. I own the adjacent ranch, the Double B. Your uncle and I were good friends. He helped me get established when I came here 4 years ago. Eleanor tried to process this information, but her mind felt sluggish. Whether from cold or shock, she could not say. She had been traveling toward a new life, toward family and belonging after months of grief and loneliness. Now that hope had been snatched away, leaving her stranded in a territory she did not know, with no family and nowhere to go. "Where are we now?" she asked, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Is this the Hartley Ranch?" Cole shook his head. "This is my spread, the Double B. The Hartley place is about 3 miles east of here. After Thomas passed, I have been keeping an eye on it, making sure the buildings stay secure. He had no other hands working for him. He ran a small operation." Eleanor felt the world tilt slightly. She had no place to go. The money she had saved for her journey was nearly gone, spent on train fare, the horse supplies, and the guide who had abandoned her. She had perhaps $20 left to her name, not enough to return to St. Louis even if she had wanted to. And there was nothing for her there anyway. The small house she had shared with her father had been sold to pay his medical bills and debts. "Miss Hartley, you are shaking," Cole said, his voice cutting through her spiraling thoughts. "We need to get you inside and into dry clothes before you catch your death. You can sort out what comes next after you are warm and have some food in you." Eleanor wanted to protest, to maintain some independence and dignity, but her body betrayed her. She was shaking violently now, her fingers so cold she could barely feel the reins. She nodded mutely. Cole reached up, his hands circling her waist, and lifted her down from the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing. Her legs buckled when her feet touched the ground, and he caught her against his chest, steadying her. Even through her wet clothes, she could feel the warmth of him, solid and real. "Easy there," he murmured. "When did you last eat?" Eleanor tried to remember. "This morning, some jerky and hardtack." Cole made a disapproving sound. "Come on then, let's get you inside." He kept one arm around her waist, supporting her as they walked toward the ranch house. With his free hand, he called out, "Miguel, come take care of this horse." A young man emerged from the bunkhouse, his dark eyes widening when he saw Eleanor's condition. "Right away, boss," he said, hurrying to take the mare's reins. The ranch house was warm and surprisingly well-kept for a bachelor's home. Cole guided Eleanor through a comfortable main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy dining table, and several chairs that looked handmade. The walls were bare of decoration except for a rifle mounted above the fireplace and a faded photograph in a simple frame. "Sit here," Cole said, pulling a chair close to the fire. "I will get you some blankets and see what I can do about dry clothes." He disappeared down a hallway and Eleanor sat shivering, staring into the flames. She could hear him moving around, opening drawers and closets. When he returned, he carried an armload of items. Several thick blankets, a flannel shirt that had clearly been worn but was clean, and a pair of wool socks. "The shirt will be too big, but it is dry," he said, laying everything on a chair beside her. "There is a room just through that door. You can change in there. Leave your wet things and I will hang them to dry." Eleanor nodded, grateful beyond words. She took the clothes and made her way to the small room, which turned out to be a bedroom, simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small mirror. Her reflection showed her just how terrible she looked. Pale, bedraggled, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and too much grief. She peeled off her wet clothes with fingers that barely cooperated, her skin prickling with cold. The flannel shirt hung to her knees, and she rolled up the sleeves several times before her hands emerged. The wool socks were equally oversized but blessedly warm. She wrapped one of the blankets around herself like a shawl and returned to the main room. Cole had put a kettle on the stove and was slicing bread and cheese at the counter. He glanced up when she entered, and something flickered in his eyes before he looked away, a slight color rising to his cheeks. Eleanor realized that, despite the blanket, she was wearing only his shirt and her legs were bare from the knees down. In St. Louis, such a situation would have been utterly scandalous. Here, it seemed to be a matter of survival. "Tea will be ready in a minute," Cole said, his voice carefully neutral. "Sit down and eat something." Eleanor obeyed, too tired and cold to argue. He brought her a plate with thick slices of bread, cheese, and some cold beef, and she ate mechanically, not tasting anything but grateful for the substance. The tea, when it came, was strong and sweet, and she wrapped her hands around the tin cup, letting the heat seep into her palms. Cole sat across from her, his own cup cradled in his large hands. He did not speak, just let her eat and drink in peace, and Eleanor found herself grateful for that too. She had endured so many well-meaning but exhausting condolences after her father's death. This quiet acceptance was a gift. When she had finished eating, some of the desperate cold had left her body, though she still felt shaky and unmoored. She looked up to find Cole watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said. "You have been very kind." "It is nothing any decent person would not do," he replied. "But we need to talk about what happens now. Do you have family back in St. Louis? Someone who can send you money for passage back?" Eleanor shook her head. "My father was an only child and my mother died when I was 12. There is no one. That is why I was coming to Uncle Thomas. He was my only living relative." Cole absorbed this, his brow furrowing. "What about friends? Someone who could help?" "My father's illness took 3 years," Eleanor said quietly. "Most of our friends drifted away. People do not like being around death and decline. It makes them uncomfortable." The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. She had not realized how much that abandonment had hurt until she spoke it aloud. Cole's expression softened with understanding and perhaps a hint of anger on her behalf. "Then we will figure something else out," he said firmly. "But not tonight. Tonight you need to rest. Tomorrow, when you are feeling stronger, we can discuss options. You will stay here. I have a spare room and it is proper enough. Miguel and his brother Carlos live in the bunkhouse, and they are good men. Your reputation will not suffer." Eleanor wanted to laugh at the concern for reputation when her entire world had just collapsed, but she recognized the kindness behind the offer. "I could not impose on you like that. You have already done so much. You look like an adventurer," Cole said suddenly, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "And life on a Montana ranch can get mighty dull. Besides, your uncle was a good friend to me when I needed one. The least I can do is help his niece when she needs it." "Let me do this, Miss Hartley. If not for you, then for Thomas." The mention of her uncle brought fresh tears to Eleanor's eyes, and she looked down at her cup to hide them. She had been so looking forward to seeing him again. He had visited them once in St. Louis when she was 16, full of stories about the West and the life he was building. He had seemed so vital and alive, so different from her scholarly, sedentary father. She had thought there would be time to know him better, to learn about this life he loved. Now that chance was gone. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you, I will stay tonight and we will talk tomorrow." Cole stood, seeming relieved to have that settled. "The bedroom you changed in, that is the spare room. It is yours for as long as you need it. I will be just down the hall if you need anything. The outhouse is out back, but there is a chamber pot in your room if you do not want to go outside in the dark." Eleanor nodded, too exhausted to be embarrassed by such practical talk. She stood, the blanket still wrapped around her, and made her way to the small bedroom. Cole had already brought her saddlebags in and placed them on the chest of drawers. The bed looked impossibly inviting, and she crawled beneath the heavy quilts fully clothed in Cole's shirt and socks. Sleep should have come easily, but instead, Eleanor lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied. Floorboards creaked as Cole moved around the house, banking the fire and preparing for night. She heard water being poured, the scrape of a chair, the soft thud of boots being removed. She thought about her father, about the long months of watching him waste away. She thought about her uncle, a man she barely knew but had been counting on. She thought about the future that stretched before her, blank and terrifying. She was alone in a strange land with no money, no prospects, and no family. The sensible thing would be to use what little money she had to get to a town, to look for work as a seamstress or a teacher or perhaps a cook. But the thought of more traveling, of arriving alone in yet another unfamiliar place, made her feel sick with exhaustion. Finally, she slept, and her dreams were full of rushing water and endless prairies and a pair of storm-gray eyes that watched her with unexpected kindness. Eleanor woke to bright sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then it all came rushing back. The river crossing, the news of her uncle's death, Cole Brennan and his unexpected hospitality. She sat up, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. The ride and the cold water had taken their toll. Her dress and undergarments were draped over a chair, dry and neatly arranged. Someone, Cole presumably, must have come in while she slept to bring them. The thought should have horrified her, but she found she was too grateful to be mortified. She dressed quickly, though her clothes were wrinkled and still bore the stains of muddy water. When she emerged from the bedroom, the main room was empty, but she could smell coffee and something savory cooking. She followed her nose to the kitchen area, where she found Cole standing over the stove, expertly flipping what looked like pancakes in a large iron skillet. He had shaved since yesterday, and his dark hair was still damp as if he had recently washed. He looked up when she entered, and a smile crossed his face. "Good morning, Miss Hartley. I hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," Eleanor admitted, "and please call me Eleanor." After everything, formality seems unnecessary. "Eleanor, then," he said, and she liked the way her name sounded in his drawling voice. "And you should call me Cole. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." She sat at the table, which had been set for two with simple tin plates and cups. Cole brought over a platter of pancakes, a jar of honey, and a pot of coffee. "I am afraid my cooking is nothing fancy," he said as he poured her coffee, "but it will fill you up." The pancakes were actually quite good, hearty and satisfying, and Eleanor ate with more appetite than she had felt in months. Cole ate across from her, and she found herself studying him in the morning light. He had strong hands, scarred and calloused from work. His face had the weathered look of someone who spent his days outdoors, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. But there was kindness in those eyes, and intelligence, and something else she could not quite name. "I have been thinking about your situation," Cole said after they had both eaten their fill. "Your uncle's ranch is yours by right, I would imagine. He had no wife, no children. You are his closest kin." Eleanor set down her coffee cup. "I had not thought that far ahead. Would it really go to me?" "Most likely. There would need to be some legal work done, paperwork filed in town, but unless Thomas left a will stating otherwise, you would inherit. It is not a large spread, maybe 300 acres, and the house is modest. But the land is good, with water access and decent grazing. It is worth something." "I know nothing about running a ranch," Eleanor said, feeling overwhelmed. "I have spent my whole life in a city. I would not even know where to begin." Cole leaned back in his chair, considering her. "That is true enough, but you could sell it. There are a few ranchers in the area who would be interested in expanding their holdings. You could probably get enough money to set yourself up somewhere, to have a fresh start wherever you wanted." The idea had merit. Eleanor could return to St. Louis with enough money to rent a small house to establish herself as a seamstress or a tutor. She could build a quiet, respectable life. But the thought filled her with a strange emptiness. She had come west looking for something, though she had not quite known what. A sense of belonging, perhaps. A place where she fit. Running back to St. Louis felt like admitting defeat. Or, Cole continued, watching her face, you could keep it. Hire someone to help run it. Your uncle had a small herd, maybe 50 head of cattle. That is manageable with the right help. Why would you suggest that? Eleanor asked. You just met me. You do not know if I am capable of such a thing. Cole's lips quirked in a half-smile. No, I do not. But I know that you traveled 3 weeks to get here, mostly on your own after your guide left. I know that you crossed a swollen creek alone rather than giving up. And I know that you are sitting here having a sensible conversation about your future instead of falling apart, even though you just lost the only family you had left. Those things tell me you are stronger than you think." Eleanor felt something warm unfold in her chest. When had anyone last looked at her and seen strength instead of just a woman in need of protection or pity? "You barely know me," she repeated, but her voice was softer now. "Then let me get to know you," Cole said simply. "Stay for a few days, rest up from your journey. We will ride over to your uncle's place and you can see what you would be taking on. Then you can make an informed decision about what you want to do. There is no rush. You have a roof over your head and food to eat. Take the time to figure out what is best for you." It was a generous offer, far more than Eleanor had any right to expect from a stranger. But something in Cole's steady gaze made her want to trust him, made her want to be the strong woman he seemed to think she was. "All right," she said. "I would like that. Thank you, Cole." He nodded, standing to clear the dishes. "Good. Then that is settled. Today you should rest, let your body recover from yesterday. Tomorrow, if you are feeling up to it, we will ride over to the Hartley place." Eleanor insisted on helping with the dishes, and they worked in companionable silence, falling into an easy rhythm. She washed, he dried, and when they were finished, Cole showed her around the ranch properly. The Double B was clearly a prosperous operation. Cole ran about 200 head of cattle, he explained, with plans to expand. He had 4 horses besides his personal mount, sturdy quarter horses bred for ranch work. Miguel and Carlos Delgado had worked for him for 2 years and were brothers from Texas, who had come north looking for better opportunities. "They are good men," Cole said as they walked past the corral where a beautiful bay gelding watched them with intelligent eyes. "Hard workers, loyal. They have been a godsend, especially during calving season." "Do you have family?" Eleanor asked, then worried she had been too forward, but Cole did not seem to mind the question. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "My parents died of fever when I was 19. I had a younger sister, Mary. She died 2 years later in childbirth. The baby did not make it either." His voice was flat, but Eleanor could hear the old pain beneath it. "I am so sorry," she said, touching his arm without thinking. He glanced down at her hand, then up at her face, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared grief and survival. "It was a long time ago," he said. "But it is why I understand what you are going through, that feeling of being unmoored, of not knowing where you belong anymore. I came to Montana because I needed a fresh start, someplace where every corner did not hold memories. Your uncle helped me build that new life. He was a good man." "Tell me about him," Eleanor said as they continued walking. "I barely knew him. He visited us once when I was younger, but that was all." Cole's face brightened. And for the next hour, as they walked the property and ended up sitting on the porch watching the mountains, he told her stories about Thomas Hartley. How her uncle had been the first to welcome him to the area, had helped him find this land and negotiate a fair price. How Thomas had taught him about the particular challenges of Montana ranching, about the hard winters and the importance of putting up enough hay. How Thomas had a dry sense of humor and a weakness for good whiskey and was honest to a fault. "He talked about you sometimes," Cole said. "About his brother's daughter back in St. Louis. He said you were clever and kind and that you took care of your father when he was sick. He was proud of you." Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. "I wish I had known him better. I wish I had come sooner." "He knew you could not leave your father," Cole said gently. "He understood duty and loyalty. He would have been glad that you stayed to the end." They sat in silence for a while, watching clouds drift across the vast sky. Eleanor had never experienced such openness, such a sense of endless space. In St. Louis, buildings and trees had hemmed in her vision. Here she could see for miles, could watch the play of light and shadow across the rolling hills. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "It is," Cole agreed. "Hard but beautiful. Every season has its challenges, but every season has its rewards too. Spring brings new calves and grass. Summer is work from dawn to dusk, but the evenings are long and warm. Fall is roundup and preparing for winter, and winter, well, winter tests you, But if you survive it, you know you can survive anything." Eleanor turned to look at him. "Do you think I could survive it, truly?" Cole met her gaze, and she saw no condescension there, no easy platitudes. He considered the question seriously. "I think you could," he said finally, "if you wanted to, but you would need help at least at first. You would need to learn everything, how to care for livestock, how to manage land, how to prepare for the seasons. It would not be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Eleanor said, echoing something her father used to say. "I am tired of easy, Cole. I am tired of sitting in drawing rooms and doing needlework and living a narrow, confined life. That is not living, that is just existing." A slow smile spread across Cole's face. "Then I think you might just make it out here, Eleanor Hartley." The rest of that day passed in a pleasant blur. Cole had work to do, and Eleanor insisted she did not need to be entertained. She explored the ranch house more thoroughly, finding it surprisingly comfortable. There was a sitting area with a few books on a shelf. Practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a worn copy of poetry and a novel by James Fenimore Cooper. The kitchen was well stocked with staples, and there was a root cellar with potatoes, carrots, and onions stored for the remainder of spring. In the afternoon, Eleanor sat on the porch and mended a tear in one of Cole's shirts that she had found in a basket. It felt good to have something to do with her hands, something useful. She watched as Cole worked with one of the horses in the corral, his movements patient and confident. He had a way with animals, she noticed, firm but gentle, and the horse responded to him with trust. Miguel and Carlos came by to meet her properly, removing their hats and greeting her with respectful courtesy. They were young, probably not much older than Eleanor's 23 years, and they had the easy camaraderie of brothers who genuinely liked each other. "It is good to meet you, Miss Hartley," Miguel said in slightly accented English. "Your uncle was a good man. We were sorry to hear of his passing." "Did you know him well?" Eleanor asked. "We would see him in town sometimes, and he would come by to visit with Cole," Carlos said. "He always had a kind word. He talked about you, about how you were coming to visit. He was looking forward to it." The knowledge that her uncle had anticipated her arrival, had talked about her to others, made his loss feel even more acute, but it also made Eleanor feel less alone. He had created a place for her here, even if he had not lived to see her arrive. Dinner that night was a communal affair. Cole had made a large pot of stew, and Miguel and Carlos joined them at the main house. The conversation flowed easily, with the brothers telling stories about roundups and close calls with ornery cattle. Cole added his own tales, and Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in months. "What about you, Miss Hartley?" Miguel asked. "What was St. Louis like?" Eleanor tried to describe the city, the buildings and the noise, the river traffic and the crowds. As she spoke, she realized how far away that life seemed now, as if it had happened to someone else. Had she really spent her days making social calls and attending church socials and worrying about whether her gloves matched her dress? "It sounds very different from here," Carlos said diplomatically. "It is," Eleanor agreed. "I am not sure I realized how different until now. But I think I prefer this." She glanced at Cole and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat a little faster. After the brothers had returned to the bunkhouse, Eleanor helped Cole clean up. They moved around each other easily now, more comfortable than they had been that morning. When the kitchen was tidy, they sat by the fire and Cole asked her about her father. Eleanor found herself telling him everything. About her father's work as a scholar and teacher, about the long decline of his illness, about the fear and helplessness she had felt watching him fade away. Cole listened without interrupting, and when she finally fell silent, he simply said, "You did the best you could for him. That is all any of us can do." "I keep thinking I should have done more," Eleanor confessed. "Should have found better doctors, should have somehow made him well." "Illness is not your fault," Cole said firmly. "And death is not something we can prevent, no matter how much we wish we could. You loved him and you stayed with him. That matters." Eleanor nodded, feeling some of the guilt she had been carrying ease slightly. They talked a while longer about easier things now. Books they had read, places they had been, dreams they had once held. Eleanor learned that Cole had wanted to be a veterinarian when he was young, that he had a gift with animals but had never had the opportunity for formal training. Cole learned that Eleanor loved mathematics, that she had helped her father with his accounts and had a natural head for figures. That would be useful on a ranch, Cole observed, keeping track of expenses, planning for the future. A lot of ranchers fail because they do not understand the business side of things. I never thought of ranching as a business, Eleanor admitted. I suppose I thought it was just, well, raising cattle, Cole laughed. It is that, but it is so much more. You have to know when to buy and when to sell, how to negotiate with buyers, how to balance investment in your herd against saving for lean times. The actual work with the animals, that is almost the easy part. As the fire burned low, Eleanor found herself reluctant to end the evening. Talking with Cole felt natural and easy, as if they had known each other far longer than a single day. But exhaustion was catching up with her, and she finally excused herself to bed. She slept deeply and woke the next morning feeling more rested than she had in months. True to his word, after breakfast Cole suggested they ride over to the Hartley ranch so Eleanor could see what she would be deciding about. He saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare for Eleanor and his own rangy gelding. Eleanor had learned to ride as a girl, though it had been years since she had been on a horse. But the skills came back quickly, and soon they were cantering across the open grassland, the morning sun warm on their faces. The Hartley ranch was smaller than the Double B but had a certain charm. The house was a simple 1-story structure, solidly built, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. The barn was modest but in good repair, and there was a chicken coop, though the chickens were long gone. A small corral attached to the barn stood empty. Cole helped Eleanor dismount, and they approached the house together. The door was unlocked, and they stepped inside to find a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, with 2 small bedrooms off to one side. Everything was neat and clean, though dust had begun to gather. Eleanor walked slowly through the house, touching her uncle's things. There were a few books, some dishes, a rocking chair by the fireplace that looked handmade. In one of the bedrooms, she found a trunk, and when she opened it, she discovered it was full of things from her uncle's past. Photographs, letters, a woman's dress carefully preserved. He was engaged once, Cole said quietly from the doorway, before he came west. She died of consumption before they could marry. He kept her things all these years. Eleanor picked up one of the photographs, a portrait of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He never told us about her, I never knew. Some griefs are too deep to speak about, Cole said. Maybe that is why he understood when I lost Mary. We both knew what it was to love and lose. Eleanor carefully repacked the trunk, feeling like she had intruded on something private and sacred, but it also made her feel closer to the uncle she had never really known. He had suffered and survived, had built a life here in this wild place, even though his heart had been broken. There was strength in that, and honor. They walked outside and surveyed the property. The land is good, Cole said, pointing out the boundaries. That creek over there, that is year-round water, which is valuable. The grazing is decent, and there is enough flat land for hay if you wanted to grow your own. The herd is out there somewhere. I have been checking on them when I ride my own fence line. They look healthy. How many cattle did you say he had? About 50 head, last I counted. There were some calves born this spring, too. You could probably sell them for $500 to $600 if you wanted to liquidate, or you could keep them and try to build the herd. Eleanor did some quick calculations in her head. $600 would be enough to get her back to St. Louis and establish herself modestly. But it would not last long, and then she would be back to scraping by, trying to make a living in a city where she had no real connections anymore. What would it take to run this place? She asked. Really, practically, what would I need? Cole considered. You would need at least one hired hand, someone who knows cattle and can handle the day-to-day work. You would need to learn enough to manage things, to make decisions even if you were not doing all the physical labor yourself. You would need to understand the cycle of the year, what needs to happen when. And you would need money to cover expenses until you could sell cattle or calves. How much money? A hand would need wages, maybe $30 a month plus board. Then there are supplies, repairs, feed for winter if the grazing runs out. I would say you would need at least $200 to see you through the first year, and that is being conservative. Eleanor had $20 to her name. The gap between what she had and what she needed felt insurmountable. I do not have that kind of money, she said, unable to keep the discouragement from her voice. Cole was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "You could sell some of the cattle now, keep enough to maintain a small herd. That would give you operating capital. Or," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "I could lend you what you need. You could pay me back when you sell in the fall." Eleanor turned to look at him, surprised. "Why would you do that? You barely know me." "I know enough," Cole said, "and like I said, your uncle was a good friend to me. Besides," a smile tugged at his lips, "I meant what I said yesterday. You look like an adventure, and I have a feeling that helping you get started would be more interesting than anything else happening around here." Eleanor wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grab onto this lifeline he was offering, but she forced herself to think practically. What if I fail? What if I cannot make it work and lose everything? You would lose your money. Then I lose it, Cole said with a shrug. I can afford it, Eleanor. I am not rich, but I am doing well enough, and I do not believe you will fail. I think you are tougher and more capable than you give yourself credit for. Eleanor looked out at the land, at the rolling hills and the distant mountains, at the sky that seemed to go on forever. She thought about the alternative, returning to St. Louis, living a small, safe life, always wondering what might have been. She thought about her uncle, who had come west to start over after losing the woman he loved. She thought about Cole, who had done the same after losing his family. Sometimes the only way to heal was to be brave enough to begin again. All right, she said, her voice steady. I will do it. I will keep the ranch and try to make it work, and I will accept your loan with the understanding that I will pay you back every penny as soon as I am able. Cole's face broke into a wide smile, the first truly unguarded expression she had seen from him. Then we better get started. You have a lot to learn, and summer does not last forever in Montana. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor moved into her uncle's house, spending the first few days cleaning and organizing, making the space her own while still honoring the man who had built it. Cole was there almost every day, teaching her the things she needed to know. He showed her how to identify healthy cattle, how to spot signs of illness or injury. He taught her how to mend fence line, how to recognize different grasses and understand which were good for grazing. He explained the economics of ranching, when to buy and when to sell, how to negotiate with buyers who would try to take advantage of a woman on her own. Eleanor proved to be a quick study. What she lacked in physical strength, she made up for in intelligence and determination. She kept careful notes in a ledger Cole gave her, writing down everything she learned. She asked questions constantly, wanting to understand not just how to do something, but why. Cole hired a man named Jack Sullivan to work for Eleanor, a grizzled cowboy in his 50s who had worked on ranches all his life. Jack was initially skeptical of working for a woman, but Eleanor won him over with her willingness to learn and her refusal to be condescended to. She has got grit, I will give her that, Jack told Cole after the first week, and she is not afraid of hard work. She might just make it. Eleanor threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. She was up before dawn, working until dark, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her skin tanned despite her best efforts with a bonnet. She learned to ride like someone who had been born in the saddle, to rope a calf, to read the weather in the sky. But it was not all work. Cole often stayed for dinner, and they would sit on the porch as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Eleanor told him about her childhood, about the books she had loved and the dreams she had once held. Cole told her about his family, about the sister he still missed, about the years of loneliness before he had found his place here. They were becoming friends. Eleanor realized, real friends in a way she had rarely experienced. Cole treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, laughed at her jokes. He never tried to make her feel small or incapable, even when she made mistakes. Instead, he patiently explained what had gone wrong and how to fix it. And if sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race, if sometimes their hands touched while working and neither of them pulled away immediately, well, Eleanor told herself it did not mean anything. He was just being kind, just honoring his friendship with her uncle. But late at night, alone in her bed, she would remember the way his arms had felt around her when he lifted her from her horse that first day. She would remember his smile, the warmth in his eyes, the way he said her name. And she would wonder if perhaps he felt something more too. Summer moved into full swing, hot days when the work seemed endless and the sun beat down mercilessly. Eleanor learned to pace herself, to drink plenty of water, to rest in the heat of the day when possible. She learned which of her uncle's cattle were troublemakers and which were docile. She learned the boundaries of her land and the best spots for grazing. One afternoon in late June, Eleanor was riding fence line when she spotted a cow in distress. The animal was lying on its side, clearly in labor but struggling. Eleanor dismounted quickly and approached cautiously. She could see that the calf was breached, coming out wrong, and that both mother and baby would die without help. Her first instinct was to ride for Jack or Cole, but there was no time. The cow was weakening fast. Eleanor took a deep breath, remembered everything Cole had taught her about assisting with difficult births, and got to work. It was hard, grueling, messy work. The cow thrashed and bellowed, and Eleanor nearly got kicked twice. But she persisted, speaking soothingly to the animal while she worked to turn the calf. Her arms ached and sweat poured down her face, but she did not stop. Finally, she felt the calf shift. A moment later, it slid free, a wet, awkward bundle of legs and ears. Eleanor quickly cleared its nose and mouth, and after a terrifying moment, the little creature coughed and took a breath. The mother, exhausted but alive, lifted her head to sniff at her baby. Eleanor sat back in the grass, covered in blood and birth fluids, and started to laugh. She had done it. She had saved them both. All by herself, without anyone's help, she had faced a crisis and come through it. She was still sitting there, grinning like a fool when Cole rode up. He took in the scene in an instant, the exhausted cow, the wobbly calf trying to stand, Eleanor looking like she had been through a battle. "What happened here?" he asked, dismounting quickly. "Breached birth," Eleanor said proudly. "I turned the calf and they are both fine." Cole stared at her, then at the animals, then back at her. A slow smile spread across his face. "You did this, by yourself. There was no time to get help, so I did what you taught me." Cole shook his head in amazement. "Eleanor Hartley, you never cease to surprise me." He reached down and pulled her to her feet. "You know what this means, do not you? You are a real rancher now, blood and all." Eleanor looked down at herself and laughed again. "I suppose I should clean up before I am decent company." "Come on," Cole said. "Let's get you back to the house. You have earned a rest." They rode back together, and Cole stayed while Eleanor washed up and changed clothes. When she emerged, he had coffee waiting and a look on his face that she could not quite read. "I am proud of you," he said simply. "What you did today, that took courage and skill. A lot of experienced hands would have panicked in that situation." "I learned from a good teacher," Eleanor said, feeling herself blush. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the mountains turn purple in the evening light. Then Cole said, his voice careful, "You have come a long way since you showed up on my porch soaking wet and lost. You have built something here, Eleanor, something real." "I could not have done it without you," Eleanor said honestly. "You have given me so much, Cole. Your time, your knowledge, your faith in me. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Cole said. Helping you, it has been, well, it has been the best part of my summer, the best part of a lot of summers, if I am being honest." Something in his tone made Eleanor look up. She found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Eleanor," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something, and I hope it does not ruin the friendship we have built, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore. Somewhere along the way, between teaching you to rope and arguing with you about fence posts and watching you become the woman you were always meant to be, I have fallen in love with you." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop and then start again, racing. "Cole," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I know I am 7 years older than you, and I know you came here grieving and trying to build a new life, not looking for romance. I will understand if you do not feel the same way. But I could not keep pretending that I thought of you only as a friend or as Thomas's niece. I love you, Eleanor. The real you, the strong, brave, brilliant woman who is not afraid to get covered in blood to save a calf." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked. "You said I looked like an adventure." "I did," Cole said, "and you have been the best adventure of my life." "You looked like an adventure to me too," Eleanor said softly, "though I did not realize it at first. I thought I was coming west to find a new home, a place to belong. I did not expect to find you. But somewhere between learning to ride fence and arguing about the best way to store hay, I fell in love with you too, Cole Brennan." For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Cole stood, crossed the distance between them, and pulled Eleanor to her feet. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," Eleanor breathed. "Please, yes." His lips met hers, gentle at first, then more insistent as she responded. Eleanor wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him, the rightness of being in his arms. The kiss deepened, and Eleanor felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Every time you smiled at me, every time you laughed, every time you did something amazing and did not even realize how amazing it was. I wanted to kiss you and tell you that you were the most incredible woman I had ever met." "I thought I was imagining things," Eleanor admitted. "I thought you were just being kind because of my uncle." "Your uncle would have liked this," Cole said with a smile. "He told me once that I needed to find a woman who could match me, who would not be content to sit in a parlor all day. I think he would say I found her." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "I think he would be shaking his head at both of us, but yes, I think he would approve." They talked late into the night, sitting close together on the porch, holding hands and making plans. They agreed to court properly, to give themselves time to be sure. But they both knew, in the way that people sometimes do, that this was right, that they had found something rare and precious. Over the next weeks, Cole courted Eleanor with the same determination he brought to everything. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows. He took her on picnic rides to beautiful spots on his land, places where you could see for miles. He taught her to dance in her kitchen, humming the tune since there was no music. Eleanor blossomed under his attention. She had been told all her life that she was pleasant-looking but not beautiful, too serious to be charming, too clever to be marriageable. But Cole looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He loved her mind, challenged her ideas, laughed at her wit. With him, she felt fully herself in a way she never had before. Jack Sullivan watched the developing romance with amusement and approval. "About time you two figured it out," he told Eleanor one day. "Anyone with eyes could see you were sweet on each other. Were we that obvious?" Eleanor asked, embarrassed. "Only to everyone who has ever been in love," Jack said with a grin. "But do not worry. Cole is a good man, one of the best. He will treat you right." As summer moved toward fall, Eleanor and Cole's relationship deepened. They were partners now in every sense, working together to prepare both ranches for the coming winter. Cole taught Eleanor everything he knew, holding nothing back, treating her like a true equal. One evening in late August, as they sat watching the sunset from Eleanor's porch, Cole said, I have something to ask you. Eleanor's heart began to race, but she tried to keep her voice casual. What is it? Cole turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Eleanor, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, the woman I want to wake up next to every morning and fall asleep beside every night. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes, she said. Yes, Cole, I will marry you. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, and Eleanor felt like her heart might burst with happiness. She had come west lost and grieving, unsure of her place in the world. Now she had found not just a home, but a partner, a love that made everything else fall into place. They planned a simple wedding for late September, after the fall roundup, but before the weather turned. There was no time for Eleanor to send back to St. Louis for a proper wedding dress, but she made one herself from cream-colored muslin she bought in town, stitching it by lamplight after long days of work. The ceremony was held at the small church in town, with Miguel and Carlos as witnesses and Jack Sullivan giving Eleanor away in her father's absence. The whole community turned out, ranchers and townspeople who had come to know and respect the young woman who had shown up out of nowhere and made a go of her uncle's ranch. Eleanor wore her handmade dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Cole wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed. When the preacher asked if she would take this man to be her husband, Eleanor said, "I do," in a clear, strong voice, meaning every word with her whole heart. At the preacher's pronouncement that they were husband and wife, Cole kissed Eleanor with such tenderness and joy that several of the women in the congregation wiped their eyes. Miguel and Carlos cheered, and Jack whooped loudly. The celebration afterward was held at the Double B, with tables set up outside laden with food that the neighboring women had prepared. There was music and dancing, and Eleanor danced with her new husband under the wide Montana sky as the stars came out one by one. Happy. Cole murmured in her ear as they swayed to a fiddle tune. "More than I ever thought possible," Eleanor replied honestly. "I came here thinking I had lost everything. Instead, I found everything I never knew I needed." "I love you, Eleanor Brennan," Cole said, trying out her new name. "I love you too," Eleanor said. "Always." They decided that Eleanor would move to the Double B since it was the larger and more established operation. Jack Sullivan would stay on at the Hartley place, managing it as part of the combined holdings. The two ranches together gave them a substantial spread, enough to support a family and build a real future. That first winter was hard, as Cole had warned it would be. The snows came early and heavy, and there were days when it was impossible to do more than feed the animals and keep the fires burning. But Eleanor found that she did not mind the enforced closeness, the long evenings by the fire with her husband. They talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their plans for the future. They played cards and read books aloud to each other. Cole taught Eleanor to play chess, and she proved a quick study, beating him within a month. They made love on snowy afternoons when work was done, learning each other's bodies with tenderness and passion. Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it new calves and the hard work of preparing for another season. Eleanor threw herself into the work alongside Cole and the hands, her skills now solid and sure. She had become a true ranch woman, capable and confident. In early summer, Eleanor began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was sure before telling Cole, wanting to be certain. One evening in June, a year after they had first met, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is someone in there," she said softly. "Someone who is half you and half me. We are going to have a baby." Cole's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and then pure joy. He dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his ear to her stomach as if he could already hear the baby. "Eleanor," he breathed, "we are going to be parents." "Yes," Eleanor said, running her fingers through his hair. "Are you happy?" Cole looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "I am more than happy. I am blessed. I thought after Mary died, after losing her and her baby, that I would never have a family again, but you have given me everything, Eleanor." Everything? The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Eleanor refused to slow down as much as Cole wanted her to. She continued working on the ranch well into her 6th month, only agreeing to lighter duties when Jack threatened to quit if she did not take better care of herself. "You have to think about the baby now," Jack said firmly. "There will always be work to do, but there is only one chance to bring this child safely into the world." Eleanor knew he was right, though she chafed at the inactivity. She spent her last months preparing the spare room as a nursery, sewing baby clothes, and making plans with Cole for the future. Their son was born on a cold February evening in 1880, with a doctor from town and a midwife in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Eleanor wondered if she would survive it. But Cole held her hand through every contraction, wiping her face and telling her she was strong enough, brave enough. When the baby finally emerged, crying lustily, Eleanor wept with relief and joy. "A boy," the doctor said, handing the squirming bundle to Cole. "A healthy boy." Cole looked down at his son with an expression of wonder and awe. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Eleanor, look what we made." They named him Thomas, after Eleanor's uncle, with the middle name James after Cole's father. Little Thomas had dark hair like his father and gray eyes that Eleanor hoped would stay that color. He was loud and demanding and absolutely perfect. The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Eleanor marveled at how something so small could be so much work, but she would not have traded a single sleepless night. Cole was a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his surprisingly good voice. As spring came and Eleanor recovered her strength, she gradually returned to ranch work, though now she had to balance it with caring for Thomas. She learned to do paperwork with a baby asleep on her lap, to nurse while reviewing inventory, to snatch sleep whenever the baby slept. Life settled into a rhythm. Work and family, the cycle of seasons, the growing success of their combined ranches. Cole and Eleanor made a formidable team, each one's strengths complementing the other's weaknesses. The Double B and the Hartley Ranch together became one of the most successful operations in the area, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. Thomas grew into a lively, curious boy who toddled after his parents from the time he could walk, wanting to be part of everything. By the time he was 2, he could sit in a saddle in front of his father, laughing with delight as they rode the property. When Thomas was 3, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Or perhaps it was just that she was stronger now, more established in her life and identity. Their daughter was born on a beautiful September day when the aspens were turning gold and the air held the first hint of autumn chill. The labor was faster than with Thomas, and Eleanor marveled at how different each child's entrance into the world could be. "Another perfect one," Cole said, holding his daughter with the same wonder he had shown with his son. "What should we name her?" "Mary," Eleanor said softly. "After your sister, if that is all right with you." Cole's eyes filled with tears. "It is more than all right, it is perfect. Mary Eleanor Brennan. She would be so proud to have this little one named after her." Mary was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, more content to observe the world around her with solemn eyes. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's smile, and from the beginning, she wrapped both her parents around her tiny finger. The years passed, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. There were hard winters and drought summers, years when prices were good and years when they struggled. But through it all, Eleanor and Cole faced everything together, their love deepening with each shared trial and triumph. Thomas grew into a responsible boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents did, already talking about the day when it would be his to run. Mary was quieter but equally determined, with a gift for working with horses that reminded Cole of himself. When Eleanor was 32 and Cole 39, she found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the others, perhaps because she was older now, or perhaps because she was still working so hard. Cole insisted she slow down, and for once, Eleanor agreed. Their second son was born in the spring, a surprise baby who came 2 weeks early but healthy and strong. They named him Daniel, and he proved to be a perfect combination of his siblings, as lively as Thomas but with Mary's thoughtfulness. With 3 children and a thriving ranch, life was full and busy. Eleanor often thought back to that terrified young woman who had arrived soaking wet on Cole's porch, lost and alone. She could hardly believe she was the same person. One evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Cole sat on the porch as they had so many times before. It had become their ritual, this evening time together when they could simply be husband and wife, not just parents and ranchers. "You ever regret it?" Cole asked suddenly. "Coming west, taking on the ranch, marrying me, do you ever wish you had gone back to St. Louis, had an easier life?" Eleanor turned to look at him in surprise. "Regret it? Cole, you gave me my life. Before I came here, I was just going through the motions, doing what was expected. I was never truly alive until I met you. You showed me what I was capable of. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. How could I ever regret that?" Cole pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I just want you to be happy. I know this life is hard. I know you work from dawn to dusk and probably have not had a full night's sleep in years." "I am happy," Eleanor said firmly. "Exhausted sometimes, yes, but happy. This life, this ranch, you, our children, this is everything I never knew I wanted. You told me once that I looked like an adventure. Well, you were my adventure, Cole Brennan, the best adventure I could have asked for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. In the distance, a coyote called, and from the barn, one of the horses whinnied softly. These sounds, once so foreign to a city girl from St. Louis, were now the soundtrack of Eleanor's life, as familiar and comforting as her husband's heartbeat. "I love you," Cole said softly. "More with every passing year. You are the strongest, bravest, most amazing woman I have ever known." "I love you too," Eleanor replied. "Thank you for seeing who I could be, even when I could not see it myself. Thank you for taking a chance on a soaking wet stranger who showed up on your porch not knowing anything about ranching or the West." Cole chuckled. "Best decision I ever made, though you did look pretty pathetic that first day." Eleanor elbowed him gently. "I was wet and grieving and lost. But you looked at me and saw possibility instead of a burden. That is why I fell in love with you." As the years continued to pass, the Brennan Ranch became a fixture in the community. Eleanor was known as a shrewd businesswoman who drove hard bargains but was always fair. Cole was respected as a skilled rancher who was generous with his knowledge, always willing to help a neighbor in need just as Thomas Hartley had once helped him. Their children grew strong and capable. Thomas, at 16, could do the work of any man on the ranch and was already being consulted by his parents on major decisions. Mary, at 13, had a way with horses that was almost magical, able to gentle the wildest Mustang with patience and kindness. And Daniel, at 8, showed signs of having inherited his mother's head for figures and business. Eleanor and Cole made sure all 3 children were educated, hiring a teacher to come to the ranch several days a week. They wanted their children to have choices, to be able to make their own way in the world, whether that was on the ranch or somewhere else. One summer day, when Eleanor was mending tack on the porch and watching Daniel play with one of the barn cats, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She was 40 years old now, her hands permanently calloused, her face lined by sun and wind. She bore no resemblance to the pale, refined young woman who had arrived from St. Louis so many years ago, but she would not change a thing. Every line on her face represented a day lived fully. Every callus represented work that mattered. The silver in her dark hair was earned from years of worry and joy, of raising children and building a life with the man she loved. Cole came around the corner of the house, leading his horse. He had gray in his hair now too, and his face was more deeply lined, but to Eleanor he was as handsome as ever. He caught her watching him and grinned. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, tying his horse to the rail and coming to sit beside her. "About how grateful I am," Eleanor said. "About how that day I crossed the swollen creek was the best day of my life, even though I did not know it at the time." "Because you met me," Cole teased. "Because I found my way home," Eleanor said seriously. "I did not know I was lost until I found this place, found you." "But yes, because I met you. Because you looked at a soaking wet, scared young woman and told her she looked like an adventure." Cole took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You were an adventure. You are an adventure. Every day with you is an adventure, Eleanor." They sat together in the warm summer afternoon, watching their son play, listening to the sounds of their ranch, their home. From inside the house came the clatter of Mary preparing dinner, and in the distance, they could hear Thomas calling to the hands about bringing in some horses. This was their life, built together from nothing but determination and love. This was the adventure they had embarked on all those years ago when a wet, lost young woman had stumbled onto a Montana ranch and a lonely cowboy had offered her shelter. As evening fell and the family gathered for dinner, Eleanor looked around the table at her husband and children, at the life they had built together, and knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The journey from St. Louis had been long and hard, filled with loss and uncertainty. But it had led her here, to this moment, to this family, to this love, and that made every difficult mile, every moment of doubt, every challenge faced and overcome, completely worth it. The years continued their steady march, bringing both joys and sorrows as life always does. When Eleanor was 45, they received word that an old friend of Cole's from Texas was in trouble, needing help with a cattle drive. Without hesitation, Cole and Thomas headed south to assist, leaving Eleanor to manage the ranch with Mary, Daniel, and the hired hands. It was the first time in their marriage that they had been separated for more than a few days, and Eleanor found she missed her husband fiercely. But she also discovered that she could run the ranch on her own if needed, making decisions and solving problems with confidence born of years of experience. When Cole and Thomas returned 6 weeks later, tired and trail-worn but safe, Eleanor flew into her husband's arms with a joy that made their children laugh and the hands grin. "I missed you every single day," Cole murmured into her hair. "But I am not surprised that everything ran perfectly without me. You are the strongest woman I know, Eleanor Brennan." "I am strong because you helped me become strong," Eleanor replied, "but I am very glad you are home. Our bed was too empty without you." As their children grew into young adults, Eleanor and Cole found themselves entering a new phase of life. Thomas, at 21, was essentially running the day-to-day operations of the ranch now, though he still consulted his parents on major decisions. He had recently begun courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch, and Eleanor suspected a wedding would come soon. Mary, at 18, had developed a reputation as the best horse trainer in the territory. People came from miles away to have her work with their difficult animals. She was independent and strong-willed, showing no interest yet in marriage but completely devoted to her work. And Daniel, at 13, was already helping his mother with the business side of things, his quick mind for numbers making him invaluable during negotiations and planning. Eleanor found herself with slightly more time for herself, time she used to read and to work on a project she had been thinking about for years, writing down her story. She wanted her children and grandchildren to know how she had come west, how she had built this life. She wanted them to understand that strength and courage were not about being unafraid, but about moving forward despite fear. Cole encouraged her writing, reading each page she produced and marveling at her ability to capture not just the facts but the feelings of those early days. "You make it sound like an adventure," he said one evening, reading her account of that first day when she had arrived soaking wet. "It was an adventure," Eleanor replied. "The best adventure. I want our grandchildren to know that sometimes the scariest moments lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Life continued its rhythm, seasons changing, cattle being born and raised and sold, children growing and finding their own paths. Thomas married his sweetheart in a beautiful ceremony, and a year later, Eleanor and Cole became grandparents when Thomas and his wife had a daughter. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Eleanor felt the circle of life close in a satisfying way. This tiny girl, named Eleanor after her grandmother, represented the future, the continuation of everything she and Cole had built together. "Your great-uncle Thomas would be so proud," Eleanor whispered to the baby. "He started all of this when he came west and built his ranch, and now look at us, 3 generations of Brennans and Hartleys, making our lives in this beautiful, hard country." Cole stood beside her, his arm around her waist, looking down at his granddaughter with the same wonder he had shown when holding his own children. "We did good, Eleanor. We built something that will last." "We did," Eleanor agreed. "We really did." As Eleanor entered her 50s, she found herself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought her to this place. She thought about her father, about the life she had left behind in St. Louis. She thought about her Uncle Thomas, the man she had barely known but who had given her the opportunity to build a new life. And she thought about that terrified young woman who had crossed a swollen creek and arrived at a stranger's ranch, wet and lost and alone. That woman seemed like someone else now, someone from a different lifetime. And in a way, she was. Eleanor had been reborn in Montana, had become someone new and stronger and more fully herself than she had ever been in St. Louis. One afternoon, she rode out alone to the spot where her uncle's original ranch house still stood. Jack Sullivan had passed away several years ago, and the house was no longer occupied, though they kept it maintained as a line cabin for the hands to use during roundup. Eleanor dismounted and walked through the empty rooms, remembering. This was where it had all started, where she had made the decision to stay to try to build a life in this wild country. She could almost see her younger self, so uncertain and afraid, trying to figure out if she had the strength to make it. "I hope you can see us, Uncle Thomas," Eleanor said aloud to the empty room. "I hope you know what your kindness led to. You invited a lost girl to come west, and she found everything she never knew she needed. Thank you for that. Thank you for giving me a chance." She could almost feel her uncle's presence, a warmth and approval that made her smile. He would have loved seeing what they had built, loved knowing his niece and his friend Cole had found each other and created something lasting. When Eleanor returned home that evening, she found Cole waiting on the porch, as he so often did. Even after all these years, the sight of him still made her heart lift. "Where did you ride off to?" he asked as she dismounted. "To the old Hartley place," Eleanor said, climbing the steps to sit beside him. "I wanted to remember where it all started." Cole took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses on her palm. "And what did you remember?" "That I was terrified," Eleanor said with a smile. "That I had no idea what I was doing, that I thought I had made a terrible mistake coming west." She paused, then added, "And that you looked at me and saw someone worth believing in. You changed my life, Cole Brennan." "We changed each other's lives," Cole corrected gently. "I was lonely and stuck when you arrived. I had my ranch, but I did not have a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me that. You gave me love and family and a reason to build something bigger than just me." They sat together as the sun set, as they had thousands of times before, watching the mountains turn purple and gold. Their children were grown now, building their own lives, but Eleanor and Cole still had each other, still had the ranch, still had the love that had grown stronger with each passing year. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" Cole asked suddenly. "You said I looked like an adventure," Eleanor replied immediately. "Some words you never forgot." "You did," Cole said. "And you are. Thank you for being my adventure, Eleanor. Thank you for saying yes that day and every day since." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the rightness of being by his side. "Thank you for making me believe I could do it. Thank you for loving me, for seeing me, for helping me become who I was meant to be." The years that followed were gentler, though no less full. Eleanor and Cole gradually handed more responsibility to their children, though they remained active in the ranch operations. They became the wise elders of the family, the ones everyone came to for advice and stories. Their grandchildren grew, and more were added as Mary and Daniel eventually married and started families of their own. The ranch house was often full of laughter and chaos, with grandchildren running everywhere and the older generation watching with satisfaction. Eleanor finished writing her story, and it became a treasured family document, passed from hand to hand, read and reread by children and grandchildren who wanted to know how it all began. The tale of a young woman who crossed a dangerous river and found not just a new home, but her true self, became a family legend. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Eleanor with a trip to the spot where they had first met, where she had arrived soaking wet on his ranch. The barn and corrals looked much the same, though there were more buildings now and everything was more established. "This is where you showed up looking like a drowned rat," Cole teased, pulling her close. "This is where you offered shelter to a stranger," Eleanor countered. "Where you showed kindness that changed my life." "I told you then that you looked like an adventure," Cole said. "I was right. 30 years, 3 children, more grandchildren than I can count, and every single day with you has been an adventure. I would not change a moment of it." "Neither would I," Eleanor said, kissing him softly. "You were the adventure I never knew I was looking for, and I would do it all again, every hard moment, every challenge, just to end up right here with you." They stood together in the place where their story had begun, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become as familiar and beloved as old friends. The ranch stretched around them, the legacy they would leave to their children and grandchildren, a testament to hard work and love and courage. Eleanor thought about the young woman she had been, so lost and afraid, thinking her life was over when it was really just beginning. She thought about her Uncle Thomas, who had unwittingly set all of this in motion with a simple invitation. She thought about her father, who had raised her to be thoughtful and strong even if he had not known she would need that strength in the wild Montana territory. But most of all, she thought about Cole, about the man who had looked at a bedraggled stranger and seen possibility, who had believed in her when she did not believe in herself, who had loved her through every triumph and trial, every joy and sorrow. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "With everything I am, Cole Brennan, I love you." "And I love you," Cole replied, pulling her into his arms, "my adventure, my partner, my love, today and always." As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Eleanor and Cole stood together, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was rich and full and meaningful. The journey from that first wet, frightened day to this moment of peace and contentment had been long and sometimes difficult. But every step had been worth it, because every step had led them here, to this place, to this love, to this life they had created together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. That they had found each other, believed in each other, loved each other through everything life had thrown their way. From a desperate river crossing to a thriving legacy that would endure for generations, their story was one of courage, faith, and the transformative power of love. Eleanor had arrived at his ranch soaked from a river crossing, lost and alone. Cole had looked at her and said she looked like an adventure. Neither of them could have known then how true those words would prove to be, or how that adventure would shape both their lives, creating something beautiful and lasting from what had seemed like endings. But that was the way of the best adventures, Eleanor reflected as she and Cole walked hand in hand back to the house where their family waited. They began when you least expected them, when you were at your lowest point and could not see a way forward. They required courage and faith and a willingness to step into the unknown. And if you were very lucky, they led you exactly where you needed to be, to the people you were meant to love, to the life you were meant to live. Eleanor's adventure had brought her to Montana, to a ranch in the middle of nowhere, to a man who saw her as she truly was and loved her for it. And that adventure had given her everything: a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that had grown stronger and deeper with each passing year. As they reached the porch and heard the sounds of their family inside, grandchildren laughing, children talking, the clatter of dishes being prepared for dinner, Eleanor squeezed Cole's hand and smiled. This was her life, her legacy, her greatest adventure. And she was grateful for every single moment of it. The story that had begun with a soaking wet stranger and a cowboy's kind words had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of courage, faith, and the willingness to take a chance on adventure. And it was a story that would continue, passed down through generations, inspiring others to be brave enough to cross their own swollen rivers and begin their own adventures. Because sometimes the best things in life came from the moments when you were most afraid, most uncertain, most vulnerable. Sometimes the greatest adventures began when you were soaked and shivering and wondering if you had made a terrible mistake. And sometimes, if you were very fortunate, those adventures led you to love. Eleanor and Cole had found that love, nurtured it, built a life around it. And as they joined their family for dinner that night, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the legacy they had created together, they knew that every hard moment, every challenge, every uncertainty had been worth it. Their adventure had begun with a river crossing and a cowboy's greeting. It had continued through 30 years of love and partnership. And it would endure in the stories told by their descendants, in the ranch that would continue for generations, in the example they set of what love and courage could accomplish. That was the true meaning of adventure, Eleanor thought as she looked around the table at her family. It was not just about excitement or new experiences. It was about finding your place in the world, about building something meaningful with someone you loved, about creating a legacy that would outlast your own life. She caught Cole's eye across the table, and he smiled at her with all the love and warmth that had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage. And Eleanor smiled back, knowing that she was exactly where she belonged, living the adventure she had been meant for all along. The ranch would continue. The family would grow, the stories would be told and retold. And somewhere in Montana territory, now entering its modern era while still holding on to its wild spirit, the legacy of a woman who crossed a river and a cowboy who saw her as an adventure would endure, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create something beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. Eleanor had arrived soaking wet and lost. She had found love, purpose, belonging, and a life beyond anything she could have imagined. And it had all started with Cole's words that first day, words that had proven prophetic. "You look like an adventure." She had been an adventure. Their life together had been an adventure. And as they entered their golden years together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well nurtured, Eleanor knew that the adventure was not over yet. As long as she and Cole had each other, as long as they had this ranch and this family and this love, the adventure would continue. And that was exactly how Eleanor wanted to spend the rest of her days. On this adventure with this man in this wild, beautiful place they had made their home. From a desperate river crossing to a house full of love and laughter, from fear and uncertainty to confidence and belonging, Eleanor's journey had taken her exactly where she needed to be, and she would not have changed a single moment of it.